For centuries, the galaxy had whispered stories of a figure so powerful that entire civilizations trembled at his name. He was not a ruler of any one planet, nor did he belong to any known empire. He moved like a shadow across the stars, leaving tales of fear, awe, and mystery in his wake. Nobody truly knew where he came from. Some said he was born in the heart of a dying star. Others believed he was shaped by the chaos of the universe itself. But whatever the truth, one fact was certain: his influence was unmatched, and his name alone could silence entire worlds. The first accounts of him appeared hundreds of years ago, recorded in the histories of civilizations far apart, each using their own language to describe the same terrifying truth. Whole fleets had vanished without a trace. Entire colonies surrendered before a single battle had begun, and alliances crumbled as fear spread faster than any enemy's weapons. Stories traveled faster than starships could carry them, and soon the mere mention of his presence caused leaders to pause, armies to hesitate, and traders to reroute entire shipments. He was not just a warrior, he was a force that shaped the decisions of the galaxy from the shadows. People began calling him the Shadow of Stars, for he was rarely seen, yet his actions always left a mark. Some said he never fought for territory or wealth. He did not seek praise, and he did not need followers. His battles were precise, almost surgical, and always left a lasting impression. Planets that had once resisted his advance would later tell stories of how their people had learned respect for his strategy, if not fear. Entire generations grew up hearing stories of his deeds. Mothers would warn children not to travel too far from their homes, citing him as a reason. School texts included accounts of his campaigns not as myth, but as events that changed the course of history. The galaxy feared him because he had proven time and again that he could act when others could not, and his actions were always final. Yet despite the fear, there was something more complex about him. He did not conquer for pleasure or domination. There were no tales of needless cruelty. Unlike tyrants of old, he did not burn cities or enslave populations simply to display power. Instead, his reputation grew from his unmatched skill and unwavering determination. Civilizations learned to respect his intelligence, his patience, and the way he could outthink opponents far larger and stronger than himself. While many feared him as a merciless force, those who studied his tactics quietly admired his brilliance. He became a legend not just of fear, but of a strange kind of respect, a reminder that power without recklessness could be terrifying. Throughout this time, the galaxy itself was changing. New civilizations were emerging, and old ones were struggling to survive. Trade routes, once bustling, became cautious pathways as rumors of his movements spread. Military leaders began consulting ancient records, hoping to find any hint of his strategy. Scientists and scholars debated his origin, looking for patterns in his actions, trying to understand the mind behind the legend. But for all their efforts, he remained elusive. Every time someone thought they had discovered his plan, he had already moved on, leaving behind only whispers of what had been. Despite his fearsome reputation, there were moments when glimpses of his humanity appeared, though only rarely. Some captured communications revealed he had a strict sense of order and a code of ethics, one that valued life and balance more than conquest. Even when striking a decisive blow against an enemy fleet, it seemed calculated to minimize unnecessary destruction. This made him even more enigmatic. He was a figure that no one could predict, feared by some, respected by others, and completely misunderstood by most. In the hearts of those who studied him, he became more than a warrior. He became a symbol of the unknown, of the limits of understanding, and of the vastness of space itself. Ships that once carried young adventurers now hesitated to explore distant systems, for fear that he might appear without warning. Entire diplomatic missions were canceled at the last moment, simply because rumors suggested his presence. It was said that he could appear anywhere, strike with precision, and disappear before anyone could respond. In every corner of the galaxy, his shadow seemed to stretch farther than any star. Yet in this atmosphere of fear, there was also a strange sense of order. Civilizations learned to navigate the galaxy with caution, becoming more strategic in their decisions. They strengthened alliances not just for power, but for survival. Trade routes became more secure, cities developed more advanced defenses, and leaders learned patience, diplomacy, and observation. In a paradoxical way, the fear of one figure had forced the galaxy into progress. His presence, though terrifying, shaped the galaxy's development in subtle ways. Every action, every decision, every fleet deployed was now influenced by the unseen force of the shadow of stars. Stories of him also reached those who lived on the edges of civilization, far from central power. Miners on distant asteroids whispered of strange fleets that appeared like specters, disabling equipment or rerouting supply lines without warning. Explorers who traveled into uncharted systems sometimes reported fleeting glimpses of enormous ships that vanished faster than any record could capture. Even ordinary citizens living in small colonies learned to respect the vastness of the galaxy, knowing that power did not always belong to those they could see. Fear became not just a political tool, but a part of daily life. And so, the first part of his legend closed with the galaxy holding its breath. Centuries of fear had created an environment of caution, respect, and relentless curiosity. The shadow of stars was no longer just a man or a warrior. He had become a symbol. He represented the ultimate challenge, the unseen force that tested civilizations in ways no one fully understood. Entire generations grew up with his presence shaping their lives, guiding their actions, and inspiring both fear and admiration. At the same time, in a distant corner of the galaxy, an entirely different civilization was beginning to rise. Humans, relatively new to the cosmic stage, were slowly learning the intricacies of interstellar politics. They were curious, resilient, and adaptable, but still largely untested among the older, more experienced civilizations. They had heard the stories of the shadow of stars, like everyone else, but their approach was different. Where most had reacted with fear or avoidance, they studied, observed, and learned. And among them, a few individuals began to consider a daring question. Could the galaxy's most feared figure ever be approached with something other than fear? Could trust, respect, or alliance ever reach someone whom the galaxy itself had avoided for centuries? This question lingered in the minds of humans as they continued their cautious expansion. They understood that approaching the shadow of stars would not be easy. Every misstep could result in disaster, yet the potential to create understanding, perhaps even partnership, fascinated them. It was a dangerous thought, one that many would call foolish, but humans had always been drawn to challenges that others shied away from. In this way, while the galaxy held its breath, a small human civilization was quietly preparing to take a bold step, one that would test the boundaries of fear, trust, and the possibilities of connection across the stars. By the end of this period, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy rhythm. The shadow of stars continued to act, his presence shaping every major event while humans quietly observed from afar. The stories of his deeds, his strategies, and his mysterious code of conduct were now part of human history, studied in schools, discussed in council chambers, and imagined in the minds of explorers. And though no human had yet attempted direct contact, the seeds of a decision were being planted. The stage was set for an encounter that could change the galaxy forever. Centuries of fear had defined him, but even legends are not immutable. The galaxy had learned caution, respect, and the necessity of strategy because of him. But the human mind, with its combination of courage and curiosity, was about to test whether fear was the only language he could understand. And thus, the story of the shadow of stars and the human who would dare approach him was only beginning. As time passed, the shadow of stars' reputation grew even more formidable. The galaxy, which had once only whispered tales of his presence, now spoke openly of the consequences of crossing him. Entire star systems were reshaped by his actions, sometimes without even a single battle. Planets that had resisted the larger empires found themselves surrendering to the fear that his name alone inspired. Leaders and strategists studied every rumor, every fragment of intelligence, trying to predict where he might strike next. Despite centuries of observation, nobody could fully understand him. He moved with precision, striking at the right moment, disappearing before retaliation could even be planned. He had become a ghost that ruled by influence and instinct rather than armies and empires. His methods were unlike those of any other leader. While most rulers sought control through conquest or the subjugation of others, he relied on intelligence, strategy, and timing. Fleets were dismantled without ever entering combat, not because of overwhelming force, but because he understood their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Cities fortified for years were bypassed or rendered irrelevant because he anticipated every move. Civilizations began to realize that he did not just fight battles. He shaped outcomes long before the first laser was fired. This made him more dangerous than any ordinary warlord, because he was unpredictable yet incredibly effective. At the same time, the Shadow of Stars rarely sought recognition. He did not issue proclamations or display trophies. Unlike other figures who thrived on glory, he worked quietly, methodically, and efficiently. Entire fleets vanished, entire colonies surrendered, and yet there were no monuments, no symbols claiming victory. For generations, those who told his story focused on the results rather than his personal ambition. He had achieved control through intellect and reputation, rather than arrogance or force. This gave him a strange kind of power, one that was invisible yet undeniable. Across the galaxy, his shadow loomed larger than any physical presence. While fear of him spread, the galaxy also began to adapt. Leaders could no longer rely on brute strength alone. They had to think carefully, plan carefully, and sometimes make sacrifices to survive. Trade routes were carefully monitored, fleets were strategically positioned, and alliances became crucial for survival. Every decision now carried the weight of his potential influence. Even civilizations far from his direct reach studied him closely, trying to understand the principles behind his actions. In a way, his fear inspired innovation, intelligence, and strategy across entire star systems. Yet, despite his calculated efficiency, there were those who questioned him. Scholars debated whether he truly understood the cost of his actions. Some wondered if fear alone was enough to govern the galaxy, or if his approach would eventually spark rebellion. Others speculated about his motives. Was he driven by some sense of justice? Was he seeking a balance that others could not see? Or was he simply a force of nature, acting according to rules that no one could fully comprehend? These questions persisted for centuries, fueling debates, inspiring legends, and keeping even the bravest strategists cautious. While the galaxy was learning to fear him, there were rare moments when glimpses of humanity emerged. Communications intercepted by distant civilizations revealed that he sometimes acted with restraint, even sparing fleets that were technically his enemies. Some colonies reported receiving supplies or protection in unexpected circumstances, hinting that his strategy was not only about fear, but also about calculated fairness. These rare acts puzzled observers, but they also added to his legend. He was not a tyrant in the conventional sense. He was a force to be reckoned with, a shadow whose motives were understood by few but respected by many. Meanwhile, humans were watching. Though they were new to the galactic stage, their curiosity and adaptability set them apart. They were cautious, yet unlike older civilizations, they had not grown up entirely under his shadow. They studied his tactics, analyzing every report, every historical record, every intercepted communication. Unlike other civilizations, humans were willing to challenge their own assumptions. They saw him not only as a figure of fear, but also as a puzzle that could be solved. Some humans began to speculate that perhaps through intelligence, patience, and courage, they could approach him in ways others never had. Humans were careful. They understood the danger, and they knew that one misstep could trigger a catastrophic response. Entire fleets could be destroyed, entire colonies abandoned simply because of a miscalculation. Yet even with the risk, humans were not deterred. Their history was filled with examples of taking calculated risks, of turning adversity into opportunity, and of finding allies in unexpected places. They believed that understanding the Shadow of Stars could unlock new possibilities, not just for survival, but for shaping the galaxy in a way that fear alone never could. As time went on, the Shadow's presence continued to dominate galactic politics. Leaders and strategists held emergency meetings whenever his name appeared in intelligence reports. They debated possible strategies, but most concluded that avoiding confrontation was the safest approach. Entire systems redirected resources not for defense against a conventional enemy, but to prepare for the unknown, because no one could truly anticipate where he would strike or why. His unpredictability became a tool that shaped the behavior of countless civilizations. Fear had become a form of governance, and every action, every decision was measured against it. Despite centuries of domination, the Shadow of Stars remained alone in many ways. He had no known home, no known allies, and few confidants. His reputation was built on action, not relationships. He trusted very few, and those who worked with him were chosen for skill, intellect, and discretion rather than loyalty or friendship. In many ways, this isolation made him even more formidable. Without distractions or personal ties, he could focus entirely on his objectives. Yet it also made him enigmatic. Even those closest to him often struggled to understand his true motives. For humans, this isolation presented both a challenge and an opportunity. While other civilizations had grown rigid with fear, humans were flexible, inventive, and willing to approach him in ways others never had. They observed, learned, and prepared, understanding that their approach would need to be different. The Shadow of Stars had never been approached with genuine curiosity or partnership, only with fear, coercion, or deception. Humans considered the possibility that respect, intelligence, and strategic patience might offer a path no one else had tried. As they continued to study him, humans also began to understand the subtlety of his influence. His actions were never random. Every strike, every maneuver, every decision served a purpose. Entire galactic events, wars, treaties, trade shifts were shaped by his presence. Understanding his strategy meant understanding the underlying currents of the galaxy itself. Humans began to see that to approach him successfully, they would need more than courage. They would need insight, patience, and a clear understanding of his principles. The galaxy, meanwhile, remained in a state of tension. Civilizations far and wide continued to live in fear, navigating every decision with the possibility of his influence in mind. Trade routes shifted, fleets were constantly on alert, and political strategies were often reactive rather than proactive. Despite centuries passing, the Shadow of Stars maintained his dominance, not by sheer numbers or firepower, but by intellect, strategy, and the careful use of fear. And yet, amidst all this fear, humans quietly continued their preparation. They were not motivated by terror or ambition, but by curiosity, resilience, and a belief in the possibility of understanding. They studied his patterns, analyzed his strategies, and debated the best way to approach a figure who had shaped the galaxy for centuries. They understood the risk, but they also understood the potential reward. If they could reach him, even partially, they could change not just their own fate, but the course of history itself. By the end of this period, the galaxy had reached a delicate balance. Fear governed many decisions, but human curiosity and preparation were quietly challenging that balance. The Shadow of Stars remained the most powerful figure in existence, shaping every major event. Yet a new element was slowly emerging, an intelligence and courage unlike any he had encountered before. The stage was being set for a meeting that could redefine everything, for humans were beginning to prepare for an approach that no civilization had dared attempt. Centuries of fear had shaped the galaxy, but human observation and courage were about to test a new possibility, that even the most feared figure in history could be approached in ways that inspired respect, dialogue, and perhaps even partnership. While the Shadow of Stars remained the ultimate force in the galaxy, a spark of something different, curiosity, courage, and insight was beginning to shine from a civilization that was just learning its place among the stars. And this spark, though small, would prove to be a turning point in the history of the galaxy. After centuries of fear and careful observation, humans decided it was time to act. They had watched the Shadow of Stars from afar, learning his patterns, analyzing every move, and understanding the rhythm of his influence. Unlike the other civilizations that had been paralyzed by terror, humans approached the situation with patience, careful planning, and a mixture of curiosity and courage. They knew the risks, missteps, could mean disaster, but they also saw an opportunity that no one else had ever considered, the possibility of building a connection rather than submitting to fear. The first step was observation. Humans sent small, unarmed probes into sectors where the Shadow of Stars had been active. These probes were designed not only to gather data, but also to test reactions. Every movement, every response was carefully monitored. They discovered patterns in his approach, the timing of fleet movements, the strategies used in neutralizing threats, and even the rare instances when he appeared to exercise restraint. It became clear that the Shadow of Stars was not simply acting out of instinct or malice. Every action had a purpose, every strike a logic that could be studied and perhaps anticipated. While other civilizations continued to speak in hushed tones about him, humans began to form a strategy. They were not looking to fight. That would have been suicidal. They were not looking to coerce. That would have been foolish. Instead, they considered a new approach, one built on understanding, intelligence, and respect. They realized that fear had ruled for centuries because no one had attempted to reach him in any other way. Perhaps, they reasoned, a different approach could succeed where all others had failed. The human team chosen for this mission was small but highly skilled. Scientists, diplomats, strategists, and observers worked together to prepare for an encounter that could change everything. They studied reports, ran simulations, and debated endlessly about the best approach. Every detail mattered, from the design of their ships to the way they would communicate. They were acutely aware that even a small error could provoke an irreversible reaction. Yet despite the risks, there was a sense of excitement. For the first time in centuries, a civilization was preparing not to flee from the shadow of stars but to engage him directly. When the day came to make contact, humans did so cautiously. Their ship moved quietly into a sector that had recently been influenced by the shadow of stars. They did not announce their presence with weapons or fleets. They approached with a signal of peaceful intent, designed to be recognized as deliberate yet non-threatening. It was a small gesture, but in the vastness of space and in the shadow of fear that had lasted centuries, it was monumental. The galaxy, for the first time in generations, waited to see what would happen next. The response was subtle at first. A fleet appeared, moving with precision and silence. It was not aggressive, but it was unmistakable. The shadow of stars had noticed the human approach. For centuries, few had dared attempt this, and fewer still had survived. But the humans were prepared. They responded with clear communication, demonstrating that their intent was not conquest, not coercion, but a willingness to understand and collaborate. This cautious interaction continued over time. Initial communications were brief and deliberate, testing boundaries, assessing reactions, and demonstrating reliability. Humans were careful to respect the patterns and logic of the shadow of stars, showing that they were neither naive nor reckless. Slowly, a fragile trust began to form, built not on fear but on consistent, deliberate action. Humans began to understand the complexities of his strategy, and in turn, he began to recognize theirs. For the first time, a bridge was forming across centuries of fear. While the rest of the galaxy watched from a distance, humans and the shadow of stars engaged in small, cooperative efforts. They coordinated minor operations such as resource allocation and rescue missions that allowed each side to test the other's intentions and reliability. These small successes built confidence and demonstrated that cooperation was possible. It was a slow process filled with tension and uncertainty, but it was effective. The shadow of stars, long accustomed to fear-driven obedience, was beginning to encounter something unfamiliar, respect based on intellect and integrity rather than terror. During these initial interactions, humans made careful observations. They noted that the shadow of stars valued clarity, precision, and honesty. He responded to well-structured arguments and logical reasoning. Attempts to manipulate, deceive, or exaggerate were met with caution and at times silence. It became clear that any future alliance would need to be built on transparency, shared purpose, and careful planning. Humans adjusted their approach accordingly, emphasizing collaboration rather than dominance, dialogue rather than threats. As the months passed, the human team began to develop a deeper understanding of the shadow of stars. They discovered that his actions, while seemingly ruthless, often had a protective element. Entire regions that had been destabilized by conflict were often guided toward stability after his interventions. He seemed to operate with a larger vision, one that required balance and order across the galaxy. This understanding shifted the human perspective. He was not simply a force of destruction, but a complex strategist whose influence had shaped the course of history for centuries. This growing understanding emboldened humans to expand their interactions. They proposed larger collaborative missions, such as coordinating trade routes and monitoring regions prone to conflict. These initiatives were small in scale but significant in impact, allowing the shadow of stars to see the value in working alongside a civilization that had historically been ignored or underestimated. Humans demonstrated patience, flexibility, and resilience, qualities that slowly gained his acknowledgement. It was a delicate dance, each side testing boundaries, respecting limits, and learning to anticipate the other's reactions. Throughout this process, humans faced internal challenges as well. They had to remain vigilant against impatience, overconfidence, and fear. Every decision carried weight, and mistakes could be catastrophic. Teams engaged in constant review and analysis, ensuring that every step taken was deliberate and calculated. They understood that this engagement was not just about the present moment, but about shaping a long-term relationship that could endure beyond immediate concerns. Their preparation, persistence, and attention to detail became their strongest assets. The shadow of stars, for his part, began to reveal subtle signs of acknowledgement. Though still reserved and cautious, he permitted humans to access areas that had previously been forbidden and shared insights into the reasoning behind some of his strategic decisions. This exchange of information was unprecedented. For centuries he had acted alone, yet now, a civilization was learning to operate in tandem with him. It was a slow, meticulous process, but it marked the first time in history that humans had earned even a measure of his trust. As interactions deepened, humans recognized the importance of consistency. They made it clear that their approach would remain steady, transparent, and principled. They avoided sudden actions or demands, focusing instead on demonstrating reliability and competence. Over time, the Shadow of Stars began to respect these qualities. He was not easily impressed, but he did recognize intelligence, patience, and deliberate action. Humans were not seeking to challenge him, but to complement his strategy, creating opportunities for mutual benefit. This growing cooperation had effects beyond the immediate participants. Other civilizations previously bound by fear began to take notice. They observed that the Shadow of Stars could be engaged without conflict, and that humans were navigating these interactions with skill and prudence. While no one else attempted direct contact, the precedent set by humans began to shift perceptions. The galaxy slowly realized that fear, while powerful, was not the only tool available. Diplomacy, patience, and intelligence could achieve outcomes that terror alone never could. The human approach also fostered internal growth. Teams learned to operate under intense pressure, make decisions with incomplete information, and coordinate across vast distances. These experiences strengthened their society, developing skills and understanding that would be invaluable in the years to come. The engagement with the Shadow of Stars became a crucible in which human strategy, patience, and collaboration were tested and refined. Each success, no matter how small, built confidence and expanded the possibilities for future interaction. Ultimately, Part 3 of the story shows a turning point. Humans, once distant observers, had begun a cautious but deliberate engagement with the most feared figure in the galaxy. Through patience, intelligence, and consistency, they had earned a measure of his acknowledgement. Small cooperative actions had begun, and trust, fragile yet tangible, was forming where fear had ruled for centuries. For the first time, the Shadow of Stars faced a civilization that approached not with terror or submission, but with insight, respect, and courage. The galaxy, still holding its breath, watched quietly. Centuries of fear had prepared civilizations for avoidance, but humans were demonstrating a new possibility, that even the most formidable force could be approached through intellect, integrity, and deliberate action. The stage was now set for deeper engagement, for cooperation that could reshape entire systems, and After months of cautious interaction, the humans had achieved what no other civilization had dared attempt. They had captured the attention of the Shadow of Stars. What had begun as observation and careful communication was now moving into uncharted territory. The humans were no longer merely trying to understand him. They were seeking collaboration. This was unprecedented. For centuries he had acted alone, guided by his own code, relying solely on strategy and intellect to shape the galaxy. And now a small, relatively new civilization was attempting to join forces with him. The first true test of this fragile relationship came in the form of a joint mission. A distant system had been destabilized by a rogue fleet, and it was in danger of collapsing entirely. The humans proposed a cooperative operation. They would assist in stabilizing the system, coordinating resources and supporting the population, while the Shadow of Stars provided strategic guidance and oversight. It was a delicate balance, designed to test trust and competence without risking unnecessary conflict. Preparation for this mission was intense. Humans meticulously studied every available record of the Shadow's past operations. They ran simulations, practiced scenarios, and built contingency plans. Every detail mattered, because one mistake could destroy the fragile trust that had been established. At the same time, they understood that this was more than a tactical operation. It was a chance to prove that collaboration was possible. The mission would demonstrate that intelligence, integrity, and courage could complement the strategy of the most feared figure in the galaxy. When the mission began, tension was high. Both sides approached with caution, aware that any misstep could undo months of careful work. Humans coordinated fleets and logistics, while the Shadow of Stars directed strategy with his usual precision. Early on, minor challenges arose: miscommunications, unexpected resistance, and environmental hazards. Yet, rather than reacting with fear or aggression, humans adapted, demonstrating resilience and flexibility. Each successful adjustment strengthened the growing trust between them. The Shadow of Stars, accustomed to operating alone, observed carefully. He noted that humans were not reckless. They did not rush into action without thought. Instead, they analyzed situations, adjusted strategies, and followed through with discipline. Their approach was methodical, intelligent, and respectful of the larger goals. For centuries, he had encountered fear, submission, or deceit from others, but here was a civilization that engaged him with neither intimidation nor manipulation. This was unfamiliar, and it demanded attention. As the mission progressed, small victories began to emerge. Key areas were stabilized, populations were protected, and rogue fleets were neutralized with minimal destruction. Humans proved that they could operate independently yet harmoniously with his guidance. These successes were significant not only in tactical terms but also in terms of trust. Each achievement reinforced the idea that collaboration could work, even in a galaxy long defined by fear and suspicion. Communication during the mission was critical. Humans used clear, precise messaging, ensuring that every action was coordinated with the Shadow's overarching plan. At the same time, they provided feedback on conditions in real time, allowing for adaptive responses. This level of interaction was unprecedented. The Shadow, used to solitary decision-making, began to see the value in consultation. He noted that humans were reliable, intelligent, and capable of handling responsibility, qualities he had rarely encountered outside of his own close circle. Throughout the operation, humans demonstrated qualities that earned respect beyond their technical skills. They showed patience in the face of setbacks, courage when encountering danger, and empathy for the populations affected by conflict. These traits, often overlooked in purely strategic calculations, resonated with the Shadow of Stars. He recognized that intelligence alone was not enough to achieve lasting stability. Effective action required understanding, adaptability, and consideration for those whose lives were affected by decisions. Humans embodied these qualities in ways that complemented his own approach. As the mission continued, mutual understanding deepened. Humans began to see the complexity of his strategy, the long-term vision behind his decisions, and the careful balance he maintained across multiple systems. They realized that his actions, while sometimes appearing harsh or relentless, were designed to prevent greater chaos and destruction. Meanwhile, the Shadow began to appreciate the human perspective. Their ability to think creatively, respond flexibly, and approach problems with empathy added a dimension to operations that he had rarely experienced. The mission also tested leadership on both sides. Humans had to coordinate multiple fleets, manage resources, and make real-time decisions under pressure. The Shadow, while maintaining strategic oversight, had to adjust to the reality of collaboration, allowing input, negotiating approaches, and trusting others with significant responsibility. This mutual challenge forged a subtle bond. Each side learned to respect the strengths of the other, while also recognizing the importance of communication and cooperation. By the midpoint of the operation, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. The Shadow of Stars, who had ruled through fear for centuries, was beginning to consider humans as partners rather than subjects, observers, or threats. This shift was gradual and cautious, but unmistakable. He allowed them greater autonomy, offered insights into complex systems, and even sought their input on certain tactical decisions. For humans, this recognition was both humbling and empowering. They were not just surviving in his presence, they were contributing meaningfully to his strategy. The populations of the affected system also noticed the difference. For generations, the presence of the shadow of stars had inspired fear and compliance. Now, for the first time, they witnessed cooperation rather than domination. Humans acted with care and consideration, while the shadow's influence was directed toward protection and stabilization rather than punishment. This combination of strength and empathy fostered a sense of hope that had been absent for centuries. People began to believe that the galaxy could operate on principles beyond fear alone. Challenges continued to arise. Rogue factions resisted stabilization efforts. Environmental hazards created unexpected complications, and communication delays tested coordination. Yet each obstacle was met with collaboration rather than confrontation. Humans and the shadow of stars adapted together, learning from mistakes and adjusting strategies in real time. The process was slow, meticulous, and often stressful, but it reinforced the idea that trust could be built through consistent, reliable action. By the conclusion of the mission, significant progress had been made. The system was stabilized, key populations were protected, and rogue forces had been neutralized. More importantly, humans and the shadow of stars had achieved something that no one had managed before: a working partnership built on respect, competence, and trust. It was not a full alliance yet, but it was a foundation, a starting point for deeper collaboration that could reshape the galaxy. This first successful mission marked a turning point. Humans had demonstrated that fear was not the only way to engage with the shadow of stars. They had shown that intelligence, empathy, and careful planning could complement his strategy. For the first time in centuries, he faced a civilization that approached him not with terror or submission, but with courage, insight, and integrity. The galaxy began to notice, even if cautiously. Other civilizations watched from afar, realizing that the rules of engagement might be changing, even for the most feared figure in existence. After the mission, humans and the shadow of stars continued communication. They reviewed successes and challenges, discussed future possibilities, and cautiously explored areas for further cooperation. Trust was still fragile, but it was growing. Small steps, repeated consistently, were building a foundation for a relationship that could endure far beyond a single operation. Both sides recognized the potential of this collaboration, not only for tactical success but also for shaping the future of the galaxy. For humans, the mission was a profound learning experience. They had navigated danger, uncertainty, and centuries of established fear to create a connection that had previously seemed impossible. They had demonstrated patience, intelligence, and empathy under immense pressure, and they had proven that even the most feared figure in the galaxy could recognize and value these qualities. For the shadow of stars, the experience was equally transformative. He had long ruled through strategy and fear, acting alone and relying solely on his intellect. Yet here was a civilization willing to engage with him on equal terms, willing to respect his methods while contributing their own insights and abilities. This partnership was unfamiliar, but it showed him a new way of operating, one that could extend his influence not through fear alone, but through collaboration, insight, and mutual respect. By the end of this period, both humans and the shadow of stars understood that they were entering a new chapter. Fear had dominated the galaxy for centuries, shaping decisions and behavior. Now, however, a new approach was emerging, one based on understanding, respect, and cautious cooperation. The first successful mission had proven that this approach could work, and it had laid the groundwork for deeper engagement. Following the success of their first joint mission, humans and the shadow of stars began to take their cooperation further. What had started as cautious observation and a single mission was now evolving into a deeper partnership. Both sides recognized the potential for something unprecedented, a strategic alliance that could reshape entire regions of the galaxy. It was a delicate process, one built on trust, consistency, and careful planning. But for the first time, humans felt that they were not merely surviving in the shadow of a powerful figure. They were contributing meaningfully to the shaping of the galaxy. The first step in strengthening this alliance was communication. Humans established a network of observation posts and relay stations that allowed them to maintain constant contact with the shadow of stars. These posts were not militarized or threatening. They were designed for coordination, sharing intelligence, and monitoring emerging threats. Humans demonstrated that they were capable of managing complex operations with precision and reliability. This level of competence impressed the Shadow, who had spent centuries relying almost entirely on his own insight and judgment. Small cooperative operations began to take place across multiple sectors. Humans coordinated with the Shadow of Stars to stabilize trade routes, resolve conflicts in contested systems, and prevent rogue factions from gaining power. These operations were carefully designed to test and strengthen the alliance, while also providing tangible benefits to the regions involved. Humans acted as both strategists and mediators, bridging gaps between civilizations that had long been divided by fear and mistrust. Their approach emphasized intelligence, adaptability, and empathy, complementing the Shadow's own methods of strategic oversight. As these operations continued, trust between humans and the Shadow of Stars deepened. They began to share more detailed intelligence, revealing patterns, predictions, and insights that would have been unthinkable only months earlier. Humans had proven that they could handle responsibility, and that their judgment was sound, earning a level of confidence previously reserved for the Shadow's most trusted advisors. In turn, the Shadow began to share aspects of his long-term vision for the galaxy, revealing strategies that had guided his actions for centuries. This exchange of knowledge created a synergy neither side had anticipated. The alliance began to produce tangible results. Trade routes that had been disrupted for generations became stable and efficient. Civilizations previously on the brink of collapse found themselves protected and guided. Conflicts that might have escalated into wars were resolved through coordinated efforts. The presence of humans working in tandem with the Shadow of Stars brought a level of stability that had not existed for centuries. People across multiple systems began to experience the benefits of this partnership, even if they were unaware of the individuals behind it. One of the most significant aspects of this growing alliance was the shift in perception. For centuries, fear had been the primary tool used to maintain order. Civilizations learned to anticipate threats, avoid confrontation, and comply with the dominant power. Now humans were demonstrating an alternative approach. Intelligence, collaboration, and integrity could achieve results that fear alone could not. This shift was subtle but profound. Observers from other civilizations began to see that cooperation could work even with the most formidable figures, challenging centuries of assumptions. Throughout this period, humans faced constant challenges. Rogue fleets, unpredictable environmental hazards, and political tensions tested their coordination and decision-making. Yet each challenge reinforced the value of the alliance. Humans learned to adapt to unforeseen circumstances, making decisions with careful judgment while respecting the broader strategy of the Shadow of Stars. Each success, no matter how small, strengthened the partnership and built credibility across the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Shadow of Stars was experiencing a transformation of his own. For centuries he had relied on fear, isolation, and unmatched intellect to maintain control. Yet now he was learning that collaboration could achieve outcomes beyond the reach of solitary action. Humans brought perspective, creativity, and flexibility to situations that had long been constrained by rigid strategy. Their empathy for affected populations, their ability to navigate complex political landscapes, and their consistent reliability challenged his assumptions about how influence could be exercised. Slowly, he began to see that fear was no longer the only means of shaping the galaxy. This period of cooperation also allowed for experimentation. Humans and the Shadow of Stars tested new strategies, combining traditional tactics with innovative approaches. For example, they coordinated multi-system operations that leveraged both human adaptability and the Shadow's long-term planning. They implemented early warning networks to detect emerging threats and prevent conflicts before they escalated. These efforts demonstrated the power of combining different strengths and perspectives, creating a model for how future operations could be conducted. As operations expanded, So did the human understanding of the shadow of stars. They observed not only his strategic brilliance but also his principles. He valued precision, clarity, and integrity, and he responded to those who demonstrated competence and reliability. Humans adapted their methods to align with these values, showing that they were not only capable of independent action, but also able to operate within the framework of his long-established vision. This alignment further strengthened trust, creating a foundation for more ambitious collaborations. One of the most important outcomes of this period was the impact on the wider galaxy. Civilizations that had long lived under the shadow of fear began to see that collaboration was possible. Reports of successful operations, stabilized systems, and coordinated efforts circulated widely, inspiring new hope. While the shadow of stars remained a figure of immense power, his actions, guided by human collaboration, now reflected not only strength, but also foresight and consideration. This shift in perception was crucial. It demonstrated that influence could be exercised through strategic partnership rather than terror alone. Humans, for their part, grew more confident and capable. They had learned to navigate complex operations, manage resources across vast distances, and make real-time decisions under pressure. They had also developed the ability to think creatively while respecting strategic boundaries, a combination that proved invaluable. This experience strengthened their society, preparing them for future challenges and opportunities. They were no longer simply observers. They had become active participants in shaping the galaxy. As the alliance continued to strengthen, the shadow of stars began to involve humans in decisions that had previously been made unilaterally. He sought their input on complex operations, considered their perspectives in long-term planning, and allowed them greater autonomy in executing missions. This level of trust was unprecedented. Humans had proven that they could be relied upon, and their consistent performance had earned the Shadow's respect. It was a transformation that neither side had fully anticipated at the beginning of their interaction. During this time, small cultural exchanges also began to take place. Humans learned about the history, philosophy, and motivations of the Shadow of Stars, gaining insight into the centuries-long decisions that had shaped the galaxy. In turn, the Shadow observed human problem-solving methods, adaptability, and ability to inspire cooperation among diverse groups. These exchanges fostered mutual respect and understanding, deepening the foundation for long-term collaboration. By the end of this period, the Alliance had grown beyond a single mission or isolated cooperation. Humans and the Shadow of Stars were now coordinating across multiple sectors, stabilizing regions, protecting populations, and resolving conflicts. Their partnership had become a model for how intelligence, patience, and integrity could complement strategic power. The galaxy was beginning to recognize a new reality, that even the most feared figure could engage in meaningful collaboration, and that fear was no longer the sole currency of influence. This strengthened alliance had far-reaching implications. Systems that had been isolated or threatened for generations were now integrated into a coordinated network of stability. Populations that had lived under constant fear began to experience protection and support. Trade routes became safer and more efficient, allowing civilizations to grow and prosper. And perhaps most importantly, the galaxy began to see that partnership, respect, and intelligence could reshape outcomes that had once seemed impossible. For humans, this period was transformative. They had demonstrated courage, intelligence, and empathy under immense pressure. They had built a foundation of trust with a figure who had been feared for centuries, showing that collaboration was possible even in the most challenging circumstances. They had also gained insight, experience, and confidence that would prepare them for future challenges, both within the Alliance and across the galaxy. For the Shadow of Stars, this period marked a profound shift. He had long relied on fear, solitude, and unmatched strategy to maintain control. Yet now he was learning the value of collaboration, trust, and shared vision. Humans had introduced new ways of thinking, new methods of problem-solving, and a perspective that complemented his own. He began to see the galaxy had changed. What had begun as fear and isolation was now giving way to something new, guided by the cautious but growing alliance between humans and the Shadow of Stars. After centuries of being feared and misunderstood, he had begun to recognize that collaboration, rather than domination, could reshape the galaxy more effectively than force alone. Humans, who had started as observers, had now become partners, their intelligence, courage, and empathy proving that even the most feared figure could be approached and understood. The first signs of a broader transformation appeared in the systems that had long been under his influence. Trade routes became more secure, communication between planets improved, and conflicts that had simmered for decades were resolved with guidance rather than destruction. Humans helped coordinate these efforts, applying their unique perspective to stabilize regions and protect populations. It was a new way of operating, one that combined strategy, foresight, and care. Populations across multiple systems began to sense the change. Where there had once been fear and uncertainty, hope and confidence slowly emerged. People noticed that their lives were safer, that resources were more readily available, and that leadership, while still firm, was more deliberate and considerate. For the Shadow of Stars, this period was transformative. Centuries of solitude and fear-driven strategy had shaped him into a master of influence, but the human partnership showed him a new path. He began to understand that control did not always require intimidation, that influence could be achieved through respect and collaboration. Humans had introduced ideas he had rarely encountered: creativity in problem-solving, empathy in decision-making, and patience in negotiation. These traits complemented his strategy, enhancing the impact of his actions and allowing him to achieve results without the constant reliance on fear. The alliance also created opportunities for joint innovation. Humans and the Shadow of Stars experimented with coordinated fleet strategies, advanced resource management, and early warning systems that could detect threats before they became crises. These systems were not only efficient but also sustainable, designed to maintain stability over decades. Humans contributed their ingenuity, flexibility, and ability to think outside traditional parameters, while the Shadow offered long-term planning, tactical insight, and the ability to foresee consequences across multiple systems. Together, they were creating a model of governance and strategy unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. During this period, humans also began to serve as mediators between the Shadow of Stars and other civilizations. For centuries, entire sectors had operated under fear, avoiding conflict but also lacking meaningful progress. Humans used their perspective to explain intentions, propose solutions, and demonstrate goodwill. Their consistent approach, guided by integrity and insight, helped bridge gaps that had once seemed unmanageable. The Shadow of Stars, while still a formidable presence, relied on human judgment in these interactions, allowing for outcomes that maintained stability while minimizing fear. Populations in previously unstable systems began to thrive. Trade expanded, cultural exchange increased, and scientific research accelerated. The partnership had not only stabilized regions but also sparked innovation. Humans shared knowledge, facilitated communication, and introduced methods for problem-solving that had long been absent under fear-based governance. The Shadow of Stars recognized the value of these contributions, noting that the galaxy could progress more effectively when strength was combined with intelligence and collaboration. The Alliance also faced challenges. Rogue fleets, unpredictable natural disasters, and political tensions tested their coordination. Yet every challenge reinforced the value of their partnership. Humans demonstrated adaptability and resilience, while the Shadow of Stars applied his strategic insight to guide operations. Together, they overcame obstacles that would have been insurmountable alone. These successes strengthened trust and proved that the alliance was not a temporary arrangement, but a sustainable model for effective action in a complex galaxy. As their partnership matured, humans gained unprecedented access to the strategic workings of the Shadow of Stars. They learned not only about tactics and strategy, but also about the philosophy guiding his actions. He valued precision, foresight, and ethical consideration in his own way, and humans learned to integrate these principles into their operations. In turn, the Shadow began to appreciate human creativity, patience, and empathy. Each side influenced the other, resulting in a partnership that was dynamic, adaptive, and mutually reinforcing. The success of this alliance began to influence the broader galaxy. Civilizations that had previously operated under fear started to recognize that cooperation could achieve outcomes that intimidation never could. The presence of humans as mediators and coordinators showed that even the most powerful and feared figures could be engaged in ways that encouraged positive results. Slowly, attitudes across the galaxy began to shift. Fear remained a factor, but it was no longer the only currency of influence. Collaboration, intelligence, and respect were emerging as equally powerful forces. During this period, humans in the shadow of stars also focused on long-term stability. They established networks for monitoring threats, systems for rapid response to crises, and protocols for conflict resolution that could be applied across multiple sectors. These systems were designed to prevent wars before they started, to protect populations, and to maintain the balance of power without relying on constant intimidation. Humans brought flexibility, empathy, and foresight to these initiatives, complementing the Shadow's strategic brilliance and long-term planning. The partnership also had an impact on culture and morale. Populations that had lived under centuries of fear began to experience hope and a sense of agency. Humans promoted education, communication, and problem-solving, helping societies build resilience and independence. The Shadow of Stars, while still commanding respect and authority, began to be seen not just as a force of fear but as a guardian of stability and balance. This shift in perception was profound. It demonstrated that leadership could be both effective and respected, without relying solely on intimidation. One of the most important aspects of this period was the demonstration of mutual respect. Humans respected the Shadow of Stars' experience, strategy, and judgment. He, in turn, respected their courage, intelligence, and integrity. This reciprocity created a model of leadership that combined strength with collaboration, strategy with empathy, and vision with flexibility. The partnership became a template for other civilizations, showing that trust and cooperation could exist even with a figure whose name had inspired fear for centuries. As the alliance solidified, larger joint operations were initiated. Humans and the Shadow of Stars coordinated missions that spanned multiple sectors, addressing systemic threats, stabilizing trade networks, and resolving conflicts. Each operation reinforced the effectiveness of their partnership. Humans handled coordination, negotiation, and adaptive problem-solving, while the Shadow provided strategic oversight, foresight, and tactical guidance. These operations demonstrated the power of combining different strengths to achieve outcomes that neither side could accomplish alone. Throughout this period, humans continued to learn from the Shadow of Stars, gaining insight into long-term strategy, risk assessment, and the subtle dynamics of galactic influence. They also taught him new ways of approaching challenges, emphasizing flexibility, empathy, and collaborative problem-solving. The result was a dynamic partnership in which both sides adapted to each other, improving strategy, efficiency, and outcomes across the galaxy. By the end of this period, the transformation was evident. Systems that had long operated under fear were now stabilized, populations were thriving, and the galaxy was entering a new era. The Shadow of Stars, once feared as an unapproachable force, was now engaged in constructive collaboration. Humans, once observers, had become trusted partners. Together, they had demonstrated that intelligence, courage, and empathy could complement strategy and power, creating a model for leadership and cooperation unlike any the galaxy had ever known. The lasting impact of this alliance went beyond immediate stabilization. Humans and the Shadow of Stars had proven that fear, while powerful, was not the only tool for shaping civilizations. Collaboration, respect, and shared vision could achieve results that fear alone never could. This revelation reshaped galactic politics, strategy, and culture. Other civilizations began to recognize the value of cooperation, and the galaxy gradually shifted toward a model where partnership and trust could coexist with strength and authority. For humans, this period marked a moment of triumph. They had navigated centuries of fear, gained the trust of the most powerful figure in the galaxy, and demonstrated that collaboration could achieve what had once seemed impossible. Their courage, intelligence, and integrity had not only secured their own place in the galaxy, but had also helped reshape the broader systems of influence, stability, and progress. For the Shadow of Stars, the period marked a profound transformation. Centuries of solitary strategy and fear-based influence had been complemented by human partnership, revealing new possibilities for shaping the galaxy. He had discovered that power could be exercised